everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and we're going to continue on with our Lilly Rose Dolls basics video, and today we are going to be working with the felt. Now in the part 1 video we talked about the pattern and we talked about how to transfer that onto tracing paper and then onto cardboard, but also how to add a seam allowance if you're wanting to work with the seam allowance. So now that we've got all of our pattern pieces cut out, I will, out of cardboard that is, or paper, then I'm going to turn the camera down and we'll start and talk about the felt. Okay, so the pattern I'm working with today is for Harvey the Hedgehog in the 16-inch size, but all of the techniques that we discuss in this video will be able to be applied to any of the different sizes of the Lilly Rose Dolls and any of the characters. So it doesn't matter that you may not be working on Harvey at the moment, just apply those principles to the pattern pieces that you've got. Just wanted to say that. Now I've also got all of our pattern pieces here that I put onto card to give me a template, and that's for the body pieces and for the head. I've not at this stage touched the clothes, this is just for the body and the limbs at the moment. Now I have got the head pieces here, but what I want you to do first is have a look through your pattern pieces and see which ones say they need to be cut out in your fur. So I've got a head gusset that needs to be cut out in fur for Harvey, and I've also got this back side head, and then we have got 2 face pieces that need to be cut out in felt too. So I'm going to keep those out at the moment, even though we're not working on the head video at this moment in time, because the bodies and the limbs are fairly generic. The majority of them are the same. There are some exceptions, so just check your pattern pieces against the pattern you've got given with your kit or your pattern, just to make sure you've got the same sizes and make sure you're working with the same sizes and you've got the same pattern pieces and that they're the same shape, is what I'm trying to say. And then what I want you to do then is just have a look at these and just see which ones you're going to be cutting out of felt. Put your fur ones to one side for the moment, but don't lose them. So I have got a fat quarter of felt here from Lilly Rose Dolls, and this is a 30% wool and 70% viscose. So both of those are a natural fibre. And this is one that I picked up, I was gifted from them actually for doing the videos for them, so that's very sweet of them. And what we're going to do is just going to unroll this felt. It's in this lovely taupe colour. Let me just move my pattern pieces out of the way for the moment, because the first thing I want to do is lay this felt out, and then I'm actually going to press it. So the felt is lovely. It's lovely and soft. It's got a nice handle to it. And if you've not worked with felt before, then it's quite a densely blended fabric. It's not woven. It's not woven with a warp and a weft like an ordinary fabric, say like a cotton is for dressmaking. It's got these fibres that have been matted together to give this lovely soft finish. So that's a lovely felt. And this felt is natural fibre with the wool and the viscose in it, which is different to the polyester felts that you might get in some shops. And I would urge you that if it's possible, I realise, I mean, I live in Spain, and I know that people are watching this possibly from all over the world, and it isn't always possible to get the best quality of felt. But I really would urge you not to skimp on the quality of your felt, because it really will show in the finished character that you're making. So it is worth sort of, if you can, find an overseas supplier, maybe take one hit, choose a generic colour that you're happy to work with, and then have that shipping cost, or order directly from Lilly Rose Dolls if you're able to. I know at the time of filming, I don't think they were supplying the haberdashery and the fabrics on their website, but I think that might be a future plan. But Richard and Claire will shout at me if I've said that and it's not the case, but keep checking back because it might be when you come back. Anyway, you will see that on this felt there are some packing lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is get out my iron and my pressing mat, and I'm going to press this flat. I'm going to use a reasonably high heat, and I'm also going to use steam as well, because that will also make sure that there's no shrinkage in the fabric at all, if there is any. Usually it's minimal if there is any, but that should give us a good starting point. So let me just get that done, and if you want to do the same with your felt, and I'll come back to you. Okay, so here's my lovely piece of felt now all nice and flat and ready to work with, and much easier as this thing. Now, what I want to talk to you about is the pattern pieces themselves and also the orientation of them, because when you are working with making a character for the first time, and if you've not worked with a single layer of fabric before, then there's a couple of points that you need to know about. So when we're dressmaking or we're making clothes or we're crafting, quite often we'll fold the fabric so that we've got the two selvage edges together, which is the bound edge on the fabric, and then we've got one edge that's a fold. When we cut out a fabric and it's on when it's doubled together with the selvage edges together in the fold line, you automatically cut out two pieces that give you a left and a right straight away when you open them, especially when they're on non-symmetrical pattern pieces. So like on a body, if we had the felt folded in half like this and we put our pattern piece on, and say there was a design on this side of the felt, or we wanted to use one side of the felt over the other, then we would automatically have, when we open this out, we'd have a left and a right of this pattern piece. And that's really important to understand, that when we are cutting out on the single, we have to, say like for the body, we have to cut one with this front side up, but then we also have to turn one over in order to cut one with this side of the front up. And that will then give us the left and the right that we need. I know it sounds a bit complicated. There are other videos on my channel about this mirroring process. So you'll notice that on some of the pattern pieces it says cut 2, 1 in reverse, and this is exactly what it means. So in my terminology I say it's mirrored or reversed, and obviously you may know it's a different way, but because this isn't symmetrical, if you just went and cut out one that way and one this way, you'd have two rights or two lefts, and you need those mirrored copies. And I hope that all makes sense. Just rewind it if it doesn't, because hopefully it will do once you understand the concept. So what we want to start and do is lay out our pattern pieces, or use our pattern pieces, bearing that in mind. So we need to know the ones that we need to cut out in double. So the arm is cut 4, the leg is cut 4, the ear is cut 4. These two pieces here are just cut 1. Oh, sorry, that's cut 2. This one here is cut 1. So the side head gusset with this lovely pointy nose with the point A and B noted on it, then that is cut 2 mirrored as well, and that one's just cut 1. So I'm just trying to start and get us organised for whilst we're putting things down onto our felt so we can cut the correct amount. So I tend to start with the larger pieces first, because they're easier to place at first, but more difficult as you get to use some of your felt up. And what we're wanting to do is it doesn't matter if you go up and down with felt, there's no fixed grain, so you can go right up to the edges. The other thing with felt is that it doesn't fray, which is great, so absolutely go, as I say, go right up to the edges with placing your pattern pieces. I've also then got what's called a friction pen. This one is by Uniball, but I think it's Pilot that actually do the friction pens. I'll put up here how to spell that for you. But what it is, it's a heat erasable gel. So this is the type of pen where if you're writing on a piece of paper, you can then rub over it afterwards with the little rubber attachment, and it will erase the ink. Well, it's actually the heat caused from the friction that erases the ink, and it also disappears with your iron. So it makes it great for drawing on fabrics. The only caveat that I would say is that you do need to be careful to make sure that your ink does erase with an iron, and that it doesn't come back again, because there has been some talk about the ink from friction pens coming back again when it gets particularly cold, and it doesn't always stay away. So people who are used to using these perhaps in the quilting world wouldn't use it to mark the top of a quilt top, because sometimes it can come back. But when we're cutting out and drawing around the outside of these shapes, it works perfectly, because we want a temporary line, and that will do the trick for us. So what I'm going to start and do is put the pattern pieces down onto my felt, and then holding it down quite tightly, and this is where the felt the pattern, don't get my words right, Claire, sorry, the cardboard template helps, is that it gives you a nice edge to draw around that doesn't then move on top of the fabric. If you've just taken your pattern pieces and they are in your tissue paper or as a pattern, then just use your pins and then just pin through your pattern piece onto your fabric so that you can then draw around it. Sometimes I have been known, especially if I'm tight on fabric, which I don't think we will be here, but if I'm tight on fabric, then I have been known to cut out multiple of my patterns so that I can place them all down onto the fabric all in one go. So again, we can use this felt any direction we like, and I'm going to butt the cutting lines right up against each other so there's no gap at all, because I am somebody who likes to sew fairly frugally and who likes to try and save as much of the felt and the fabrics as I can do. So we're just going to mark this round. So we've done one with our front side up, and I've turned my pattern piece over, and we've done the second one with this side up. And if you wanted to, you could always put cut one this side up by panel work, and then you could turn it over and put cut one this side up, and then that will help just remind you. So I'm all about tricks and ways to shortcut and just to take the pressure out of it all, really, just to make sure that we can understand what we're trying to do. So I am going to now mark down on the felt. Shall I mark down that, or shall we say? We'll save that for the head, because I think we're going to have plenty of felt. So we'll save that for the head when I do the head and the ears. But just be aware that if you were cutting this out all in one go and doing all the video, or if you were unsure as to whether you'd have enough felt, you'd then be putting all of your sections on straight away. And that Frixion pen has left quite a nice mark there. So let's carry on then. So we've got our body done, so let's put that out of the way. Let's move on to a leg, and I can probably fit a leg down this direction as well. And I've got this Sew Line chalk pencil, which is very good as well if you're working with a darker coloured felt and the darker Frixion pen won't show up on it. Then do consider using a chalk pencil as well, because they are very useful too. Okay, so we've got to do two of our legs mirrored as well. So we're going to cut out two with what the drawn side up, and then I'm going to turn them over and do to the other side as well when we get round to that. So that's one, and then we're just going to try and do the second one here. And if I'm careful, this centre section here will fit an ear very nicely in there as well, so we can use that for our ears, those little offcuts. And generally I save all of my felt as much as possible for the offcuts so that I can use them for other projects. So again, let's draw around. So this is going to be my second one with this side up. So that's 1, 2, and then I need to turn it over and do another 2 as I go round. So I'm using these along the edges. So as I say, I'm using my bigger pieces first. I'll do 2 in there as well. I'll then carry on and do the same with the arms as well, and I'll fit those in as well as I can do around these body pieces, and just use as little felt as possible, making sure that I'm going to cut to this side up and to that side. Okay, so let me carry on and mark this out for you, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look and see how we've finished up. One thing I did think to say is that if you are somebody who has cut out your pattern pieces on the stitching line and you're not adding your seam allowance in advance, then when you place your pattern pieces onto your felt, you will need to leave at least 1/4 inch around each pattern piece. So if you're putting 2 pattern pieces together like I have here, you'll need to leave at least 1/2 inch gap between those. And then what you'll do is you'll draw around your template, but you'll be drawing on the stitching line, which was the line inside. You'll be drawing on your stitching line, and then you'll need to leave your seam allowance around the outside of that. You'll then rough cut that out, and then we'll talk about how you then actually tack when you tack this and sew these together when we go into the individual sewing videos, as to how you then tack and use the sewing line rather than the seam allowance line that I've drawn. So it depends on which way. Obviously, I chose the way to add the seam allowance when I was tracing and cutting mine out. So mine's got that built in. And if you're a beginner, that would probably be the way I would suggest you go, because otherwise it's really easy to forget that you've got to leave that seam allowance extra room or not leave enough room. And then you then are going to struggle when you come to actually want to cut this out, and that you've got enough to actually attach these together. So that's what I would say. So let me just carry on with what I was doing. I just thought of that just quickly. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this very clearly, but I've got all of my pattern pieces marked out. So I've got a left and a right for my body down here. I've got 2 arms of the left version and 2 arms of the right version over here. And then I've got 2 left legs and 2 right legs there as well. So that makes that correct, because each piece has got to be sandwiched together you need the 2 halves. So all that needs to happen now is that I can then go ahead and cut out on my lines, and that's because I've included my seam allowance already. If you've not included your seam allowance already, you need to rough cut around yours so that you leave enough room for your seam allowance for when you want to cut these, to sew these together. So let's just get on and get these cut out, and we'll get moving forward. And it really is very simple to cut out with felt, because it is just so easy to work with. It's not too stiff a fabric. I was going to say it's a stiff fabric, but it isn't really. It's a nice fabric to work with, and it just does take a nice cut edge very nicely as well. So you can just snip around these just as you would do. A nice pair of sharp scissors will help you. And it doesn't matter whether you have big dressmaking scissors like these ones or you have smaller scissors. Just take your time and just cut those out as neatly as possible, and then make a pile of your pattern pieces as you go forward. If you have a preference over which side of the felt that you use, is there a slight difference? Very slightly. I'm going to use this top side for mine. So as I cut mine out, I'm just going to put a pin through twice into my felt like that, and that will tell me that's the right side of the felt to be using, as in the top side that I want to be on the outside, because it would be very easy. There's hardly any difference in there at all that you would notice, but sometimes with some fabrics, and it depends which felt you get, one side of the felt can be slightly more mottled. There can be slightly more coloured sort of variation in it than the other side, and so it is always a useful thing to do, if you can do, to mark the side that you want to be working with. And so I will do that either as I cut them out, or so I can just put a pin through, just double on that, or I'll just go through and put the pins into the pieces whilst they're still on the cutting board before I start to cut them out, and that will also remind me and make sure that I don't get anything mixed up with different shadings or different colours. So you can go ahead and do the same if you'd like to, just so that it keeps you on the straight and narrow and gives you the confidence that everything's going to be right. Pop these pins in here, and then carry on cutting out all of these pieces, and then we'll have worked with the felt. The only thing that I will say is that when we come to making the clothes, there are very different rules or tips and tricks for dealing with fabric as opposed to dealing with felt. So if you were cutting this character out and say you were making it in a calico as a practice, you just wanted to have a practice run, or you wanted to make the character in a quilting cotton, something like that, then you would very definitely need to pay attention to how you are laying these pattern pieces out. And each of them have got this line here, which is a grain line, and that grain line there needs to be straight up and down your fabric or straight across. Generally, the grain line runs alongside the selvage edge, which is the bound edge on the edge of your fabric. If you've got a printed fabric, sometimes it has the name of the manufacturer and then a code for the type of fabric it is. But these grain lines, and we will work with more grain lines with the clothing when we get onto that, but that's why they are there. For me, with felt, you can just sort of put them any which way to make the best use of your felt, but with a fabric for a for a jacket or for a dress for one of your characters, then we will need to pay attention to grain lines. But just to say that. And also, if you are cutting out with calico or with the quilting cotton, just use your grain line to make sure that you're on the straight of grain. And you can do that by, say this was the edge of your fabric here, and there's your grain line. Get a tape measure. First thing I would do is extend that line up. Let me just get a ruler. So let me write grain by the side of it as well. So I've extended that, so that was how big it was before, and I've extended it right at the pattern piece. And then using the edge of my fabric here, I would take my tape measure, whether in centimetres or inches, it doesn't matter, put my tape measure right against the selvage edge of my fabric, and then I would then match up my pattern, the grain line on my pattern piece with a measurement. I'd then go to the top of my pattern piece and I'd measure again, and on this piece there's nearly 1/2 centimetre difference. So at the bottom it was 9 centimetres, at the top here it's 9.5. So then I would adjust that pattern piece by taking it in or out, pivoting it, in order to make sure that the both measurements on that grain line at the top and at the bottom are the same to the selvage edge, because that will make sure that your pattern piece then is straight of grain, and that's really important, especially when you've got something like your arm where you've got a curve on it. It'd be very easy to think that it doesn't matter which way it goes, but there's a grain line on there which I would extend to make the full length, and then you can then measure that to make sure it's on straight of grain. But if you're working with felt, there's no grain on that at all, so you can just place your pattern pieces on and just cut those out and just work with those, and everything will be great. So let me get my pieces cut out and I will come back to you. Okay, and so when you've finished, then you should be able to lay out all of your pattern pieces like this, and you can now see that with those pins on top, we've got a left and a right for each foot. So there are 2 legs there, a left and a right for our body, and then 2 sets of arms, a left and a right for each one, and then you know that you've got all of your pattern pieces ready. Obviously, if you're cutting yours out all in one go, you may well have the head pieces there as well cut out, but at the moment I'm just showing you for the body and the limbs, so I've saved my head felt in order for me to cut that out at the time when I do the head video. But just for now, this has got all of those together, so we're ready to move on to the next step. So that concludes today's lesson, if you like, or part of the sew along. I know we've not actually done any sewing yet, but we're getting closer, I promise. And quite often with characters like this, there's a lot of work involved in the preparation, but it's that preparation and that attention to detail that's going to mean that your character turns out beautifully, and that's exactly what you want. You know, this isn't a fast project, it isn't a speed through it kind of project. This is slow stitching that is really enjoyable and gives you something that you're going to treasure for years and years to come, or the person who receives it's going to treasure for years to come. So let's get on to we'll move on. So getting ahead of myself, sometimes my head goes too fast. Let's move on to the next stage then, which will be in the new video, and that's where we'll be sewing the body first, and then we'll move on to sewing the limbs. So I hope you've enjoyed sewing me today. If you have, please consider hitting that subscribe button or giving me a thumbs up, or both. And if you want to, then please leave a comment and let me know perhaps where in the world that you're watching this video from, because it's, as I've said, I'm in southern Spain, so it's always lovely to know whereabouts in the world you are sewing with me, because I just like to know. Very curious on that kind of thing. Okay, have a great day everybody, happy stitching, and I'll see you in the next part.